Raymond Holt thought his days of danger were over, but when he spotted Liam Mercer's tiny shoe by the edge of a filthy, abandoned pool, everything changed. What began as a simple walk through a quiet neighborhood turned into the unraveling of a chilling plot involving a trusted community leader, a released convict, and a child targeted with terrifying precision. This wasn't just a near drowning, it was a planned disappearance, interrupted by a watchman who was supposed to be off duty. Raymond Holt had spent the last 3 years of his life trying to forget the chaos of his career. After 3 decades working as a corrections officer, he'd taken a quieter role as a night security watchman for a string of residential neighborhoods. He liked Clearfield Estates the most, a community of clean streets, trimmed hedges, and a silence that most would call peaceful, but Raymond knew bordered on unnatural. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Until that afternoon. It was just past 2 p.m. when Raymond decided to take a walk on his day off. The sun was bright, but the breeze was cool and the streets were almost empty. Families were inside, hosting weekend barbecues or lounging by their private pools. As he made his way past the south end of the neighborhood, he took a shortcut behind the hedge wall, a narrow gravel path that curved past the long-abandoned Clearfield Recreation Center. The facility had once been a buzzing social hub, but had shut down years earlier after a string of code violations and budget issues. It remained fenced off, overgrown, and mostly forgotten. Something caught Raymond's ear. A rhythmic sound, soft at first, then clearer. Water splashing. He stopped walking. His eyes scanned the rusted fence enclosing the old pool. No voices, no music. Just the strange sound of water being disturbed. He moved closer to the wooden planks and found a crack wide enough to peer through. Inside, the pool was filled with stagnant green water, and thick algae floated in clumps across the surface. The deck was cracked, littered with weeds, and coated in a film of grime. But in the water, he saw movement, ripples that didn't match the wind. He circled to the rear maintenance gate, which had long been secured with a rusted chain and padlock. Today, the padlock hung loosely, broken. Raymond didn't think. He pulled it free, pushed the gate open, and rushed inside. As he neared the deep end, his eyes widened. A child's shoe was sitting on the edge. Then he saw it, a small figure beneath the surface, arms barely moving, air bubbles rising in quick bursts. Without removing his shoes, Raymond dove in. The water was frigid despite the summer heat. He reached the child quickly and pulled him up. The boy was no older than 10. His limbs dangled as Raymond carried him out, soaking wet and silent. He gently laid him down on the deck and began CPR, counting compressions with a rhythm he remembered from training long ago. After several tense moments, the boy gasped violently, vomiting water and coughing until he began to cry. Raymond wrapped him in his own shirt, trying to keep him warm. His heart pounded, not just from the effort, but from the confusion. There was no one else there. No lifeguard, no parents, no signs of play. Just a boy on the brink of death, and a facility that should have been impossible to enter. He called 911 with shaking hands, unsure what he had just interrupted, but certain that something about it wasn't right. Paramedics arrived within minutes, lights flashing through the calm streets as neighbors peeked from their windows, curious but unaware of the gravity of the situation. Raymond stood near the broken gate, his clothes soaked, watching as they stabilized the boy. The child was conscious now, dazed, and clinging to the paramedic's hand as they loaded him into the ambulance. Raymond gave his statement quickly, but the more he spoke, the more questions began to surface. The boy had no visible injuries, only signs of exhaustion and mild hypothermia. His name was Liam Mercer, age 10, a resident of Clearfield Estates. Police reached out to his parents, who were apparently attending a social gathering at a friend's house just a few blocks away. When asked why their son was alone, drowning in an abandoned pool, they were stunned. They believed Liam was spending the day at a neighbor's house, watching movies and playing games. But that neighbor, when contacted, said Liam never showed up. There had been no plan to host him, no arrangement, and no record of him arriving at their property. The timeline didn't add up. Somewhere between the time his parents left him and when Raymond found him, Liam had vanished. Detectives arrived shortly after the paramedics, cordoning off the area with tape and starting a preliminary sweep of the scene. The facility was in worse shape than expected, walls crumbling, old equipment rusting in place, and an overwhelming smell of mildew and decay lingering in the air. But there were strange inconsistencies. The pool's outer gate was supposed to be sealed with an industrial-grade padlock, one provided by the Homeowners Association and checked monthly. Yet the one found today was snapped clean through as if deliberately broken. Even more alarming was the lack of disturbance at the scene. There were no scattered clothes, no toys, no signs of a struggle or playtime, just the one shoe, sitting on the edge of the deep end like a silent marker. No footprints in the surrounding mud suggested that no one had left in a hurry, or perhaps someone had taken steps to erase them. Officers questioned nearby residents, but no one reported seeing Liam walking to the pool or anyone else entering the recreation center that day. No witnesses, no sounds, nothing but silence. Back at the station, Raymond reviewed his memory again and again, trying to recall every detail. He hadn't seen anyone else in the area, but there had been something strange, a faint tire track near the gate. Not from a community vehicle, something heavier, more recent. But in the rush of the rescue, he hadn't thought to mark it or mention it. Investigators decided to pull security footage from the nearby street cameras, especially the route leading from Liam's house to the old pool. What they were about to find would turn the case upside down and prove this was no accident, no coincidence, and no simple act of trespassing. Something far more deliberate was at play, and it had nearly claimed a child's life. The footage began like any ordinary day in Clearfield Estates. Well-kept streets lined with parked cars, families carrying grocery bags, joggers in motion. But around 2:12 p.m., one camera caught something out of place. A dark SUV with tinted windows creeping along the side road behind the recreation center. It slowed at the dead end near the maintenance lot, then idled. The vehicle had no visible plates on the front bumper. After a few moments, the rear passenger door opened. A small boy, later identified as Liam, stepped out. He wasn't running or struggling. His movements were slow, hesitant, almost confused. A man exited from the front and gently took Liam's arm, guiding him toward the fence's side gate. The camera's angle caught a glimpse of the man's bare forearm, a tattoo partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. Less than 20 minutes later, the man returned to the vehicle alone. Liam was not with him. He climbed back into the SUV and reversed away from the camera's view. The timestamp was 2:31 p.m. Detectives slowed the footage, zoomed in on the man's tattoo, and enhanced the contrast. The design was sharp and angular, a black triangle inside a circle with radiating lines. One officer recognized it immediately. It was a known gang symbol from a prison in the next county, often associated with extortion, trafficking, and child-related crimes. They ran a scan on the SUV using still images and partial plate fragments captured on a different camera. Within hours, the vehicle was linked to a stolen car reported missing 2 weeks earlier from a nearby city. It had likely been used for illegal activity, repainted and swapped with fake tags. Whoever was driving it had gone to great lengths to avoid identification. As investigators tried to determine who the tattooed man was, attention shifted back to the fence gate. It had been broken, but not randomly. Forensics teams discovered that the lock had been cut with precision, using bolt cutters. The maintenance door showed no signs of forced entry, but scuff marks near the handle and faint scratches on the interior suggested it had been opened and closed recently, maybe even several times. Detectives interviewed Liam as soon as his condition stabilized. The child was shaken and confused. He remembered walking toward the front of his neighborhood, thinking he was going to meet a friend. A man in a black car had waved him over, calling him by name. After that, his memory became blurry. He remembered being thirsty, then cold, then being underwater. He didn't recall getting into the vehicle, nor walking to the pool. His responses hinted at sedation or manipulation. Toxicology reports showed mild traces of a tranquilizer often used in veterinary medicine. Not strong enough to knock him out completely, but enough to cause dizziness and memory fog. This wasn't a near drowning. It was a planned abduction interrupted by sheer chance. The boy had been delivered to that pool deliberately and left there to die in silence. Without Raymond's intervention, Liam would have been another unexplained tragedy, a case closed before it ever opened. Investigators were now certain they weren't dealing with a simple case of trespassing or child neglect. Someone had orchestrated Liam's disappearance with purpose, timing it to avoid detection and leaving no trace of involvement. But there was one clue they couldn't ignore: the tattoo on the suspect's arm. It led them to search state criminal databases, scanning through ex-inmates with gang affiliations and matching physical characteristics. Hours of digging eventually produced a name: Vance Kellner, a 42-year-old repeat offender with a record stretching back 2 decades. He had served time for various crimes: armed robbery, assault, and most notably, involvement in a suspected child abduction ring that had fallen apart due to lack of evidence. Vance had been released from prison less than a year ago, allegedly on good behavior. But to Raymond Holt, the name sent a jolt of recognition straight through his chest. Raymond remembered Kellner from his days in corrections. He wasn't just another inmate. He was memorable for all the wrong reasons: calculating, cold, obsessive about small details. One thing had always stood out about him: a fixation with time. Every day, he would stare at Raymond's wristwatch, asking about its brand, how it ticked, how it measured hours. That detail had seemed harmless then, almost eccentric. But now, it meant something. The surveillance footage showed the man, presumably Kellner, wearing a red digital watch. That wasn't coincidence. It was a message, a taunt, aimed at the one man who had once stood guard over him. The realization twisted Raymond's stomach. If Kellner was behind this, it meant Liam wasn't just a random victim. It meant someone had been watching Clearfield, choosing targets, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Authorities tracked down Kellner's last known address, a rundown apartment in a neighboring town. When they arrived, the unit was empty, but inside they found maps, surveillance photos, and marked calendars. The photos were the most disturbing: children playing in parks, walking home from school, riding bikes, each one cataloged and labeled with names, ages, and street locations. Among the photos was one of Liam, taken weeks earlier near his school's front gate. Pinned on the wall next to the photos was a layout of the Clearfield Recreation Center, marked with circles, and arrows indicating possible entry points, timing schedules, and visibility from the street. Whoever had made these plans had been calculating for weeks, maybe months. But there was more. A folder hidden under the floorboards contained paperwork linking Kellner to a local contractor company that had been subcontracted by Clearfield S. Homeowner S. Association for minor maintenance. One of the listed employees, Ron Lesterman, a middle-aged man with no criminal record on the surface, but who shared a post office box with Kellner. That discovery changed everything. Kellner hadn't acted alone. He had inside help, someone with access to keys, gate codes, and maintenance schedules. The web was wider than anyone expected, and what began as a tragic accident was now unraveling into a conspiracy embedded within the heart of the neighborhood. The investigation took a darker turn with the discovery of Ron Lesterman's connection to Vance Kellner. On paper, Ron appeared clean, an HOA board member with a stable income and a polished reputation. He had volunteered at local events, managed vendor contracts, and even hosted charity dinners for the neighborhood. But beneath that polished image lay secrets no one had thought to question. Detectives dug into Ron S.'s background and found that his real identity had been changed legally over 15 years ago, following an expunged case tied to an interstate trafficking investigation. It hadn't resulted in charges, but it raised enough suspicion to merit further scrutiny. Now, coupled with the evidence from Kellner's hideout, authorities saw a pattern emerge. Ron had likely been the one feeding Kellner information from the inside. The stolen padlock, the undetected access to the abandoned pool, the absence of alarms or neighborhood alerts, it all pointed to insider knowledge. Ron's access to security schedules and key rotations made it easy for him to create vulnerabilities. And with Kellner's experience in surveillance and manipulation, the two had built a system where they could identify, follow, and isolate children without raising alarms. But why Liam? That question lingered. Investigators uncovered one final piece of evidence in Ron S.'s home office, a spiral notebook filled with notes and timelines. On one page, under Liam's name, were details: his school, his routine, the names of his friends, and even the model of his bicycle. He had been watched for weeks. There was no personal motive. Liam had simply been a convenient target, vulnerable, predictable, and easy to isolate on a weekend when both parents were distracted. The plan had been carefully structured. The SUV had been parked where no security camera could see the license plate directly. The maintenance gate had been rigged days in advance, and Liam had been lured by someone calling him by name. Once brought to the pool, he had been drugged and left in the deep end, likely with the intent that he would drown quietly, unnoticed, in a place no one had any reason to visit. But what they hadn't counted on was Raymond Holt being there. His presence disrupted the timeline, forcing Kellner to abandon the scene earlier than planned. It also left behind enough forensic evidence for the case to be cracked open. Within 48 hours of the discovery, authorities issued arrest warrants. Ron was apprehended as he tried to board a flight under a fake identity. Kellner was captured 3 days later in a remote cabin across the state border, hiding out with burner phones and false documents. The case made headlines across the region, not only for the horror of what had nearly happened, but for the disturbing reality that it had been planned so precisely, hidden in plain sight. Raymond Holt's spontaneous decision to walk a different route that day had saved a life, but also exposed a criminal network that might have gone on for much longer. Liam recovered, both physically and emotionally, with time. But the shadow of what could have happened left its mark. And for Raymond, who had spent years trying to leave danger behind, it was a reminder that sometimes you were exactly where you were needed, even when you think you've left that life behind.